Doesn't so that she I think it done get shown yeah the hal now. So she I didn't lay no costo she had it was she did doesn't so the way she I did keda hat any di don netan leden the she I did betratat is na kot she di sada ko she I kom hat en da hon lago she doesn't so she she I did kat has touches kai. Så jeg kat otusast anna ko she ya pada hoil net only. Ajana hoi now hat nenegi she ya kat tianda ataten do ataten do she kat hat she jobe in nado de she dat so ha stede ya kat doesn't so de she to dast anna ko be kat hoil net. And the storytelling of our people during the time that they were running from the being captured. Many of the Dene had been, of course, captured and taken to Fort Sumner or Wingate. And the Dene that did escape and did make their way into the Chuska Mountains, they're the ones that stayed up in that area. And Manuelito's group that he led, I don't know if it was more than 100 people, but it was a good number of people. And my great-great-grandmother, being a young lady in that with the infant daughter, which would be my great-grandma. But the one thing that I asked one time, I said, which is to ask her, how did you get your name? Because it was a name that was given to her when she was very young. And there was only certain people that could actually give names that she was with. And so to be known by the holy people, you had to have a very special name. And so that name, Natlithaspa, I don't know what it means, but I do know that it is a name that is given to certain type of women or the female or a son. And so that was her name. I have no idea what it means, Natlithaspa. And that was her regular ceremonial type name in that she went by. And the reason I know that is because I participated in many ceremonies where she had to give that name. But I often wondered who gave her that name, and so sometimes I think it was possibly Manuelito that gave her that name, because he would be a name giver. She was an infant when they began to evade the military, and being with Manuelito and his group, they would hide in the mountains. And they lived off of rabbits and even squirrels and other small critters and that they could capture. And every now and then, of course, they had elk and they had deer, but they did evade the military. There was so many different foods in that was available, that was natural, that was in the ground, and that they could harvest and eat. And of course, during the time that they evaded the military for 2 years is what she would tell us. Na kinache ndani zoro. And so that was 2 years that they evaded the military by living in the mountains and by hiding out in all these different places. And there was a lot of different foods in that she would name and she would talk about. And everything from the sumac berries to the bark of the ponderosa and even the pinon pine. The bark, the inside skin of the bark between the tree and the bark was edible. And it was apparently very nourishing because they could harvest that and that by a group of people. But the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is that during the time that they were running from the military, every now and then they would go to some of these pueblos like the Zuni and the Yakima, and some of these pueblo people were very helpful. And sometimes they would offer them livestock and that they could eat and survive on. And then the other thing that they would do is they would raid these military outposts where they had livestock. and they would actually go in there at nighttime and kill an animal and butcher it right at the site, and then carry off the carcass of the animal that they had harvested during the night. And that was the other thing that they would do, and they did that often. And many times they knew how the military operated, that they would have a certain time that they would relieve the guards and the changing of the guards, and they would watch, and then they would, when the changing of the guard took place, the guys that were going off post, they would hurry, and the other ones that would come on post would not be in such a big hurry, so there'd be that little time gap. And that's when they would go and they'd take an animal or two. And they were very quick on butchering it. And that was one of the ways that they fed themselves. But as I mentioned, they did have the ways to harvest deer and elk and some of the larger animals. And there was another animal that they also used very much, as the porcupine. They could singe the porcupine and all its fur and the quills. After they burned off all the quills on that, they could butcher the porcupine and actually could feed from that as well. But there were many things in that they used to feed themselves. But the one problem that they always say that they had was, of course, keeping their feet covered. And so they would use every skin on that they could find to wrap their feet, and called it a ketkale, which would be any kind of skin on that they could use to cover their foot for footwear. I remember one time when I was speaking with my grandma, I said, what seemed to be the one item that people needed to have the most? And she answered me in one word, kela, which would mean the footwear. And that was something that was very important. If they could wrap their feet with skins or anything else that they had, and insulate it with grass and so on, that they could get around in the wintertime. My great-grandmother would talk about a time. She would remember that she was sometimes very cold, and then sometimes they had to be very quiet for a long period of time when they were hiding from the military. And they never stayed very long in any one place for any length of time, and they were always on the move. But eventually, Manuelito was told, that there's things in Fort Sumner were not as bad as his people were experiencing, and that it might be to his advantage, if he wanted to have his group survive, that they surrender. So after 2 years of evading the military, he did surrender at Fort Wingate. But the thing about Manuelito and his group, he was the one that probably gave the most difficult time to General Carlson. And he even named his group probably the Wolves of the Mountain. So my great-grandmother was a part of the group that was called the Wolves of the Mountain for those 2 years that they evaded the military and avoided being captured. When my great-grandmother would talk about the time that they surrendered at Fort Wingate and then marched to Fort Sumner, some 300 miles to the east, and they arrived after the other Dene had been there for 2 years, and they saw the horrible conditions that the Dene were living in. And I remember one time he said, is what she would say, which meant we were like prairie dogs and we lived in the ground. And so what she was describing is that they would dig into the ground and then the kind of at ground level, and then they would put some kind of covering of poles and that across the top, and then cover the poles with dirt and that they had removed to dig the hole, and then they would live in the ground, and that was probably the most used way that they stayed alive, because it was warm if they were below ground, and if they covered themselves up with dirt, and the families could be in there in one place to sleep and so on. But while they were there, of course, there was a lot of disease and that was taking place and affecting the people, and actually people were dying from the disease and that they contacted, and also starvation. Even though that the military records that they had given the abundant amount of rations, food rations, there was still never enough. And some of the things that our people experienced, of course, uh, the social disease and that came about because the young women, some of the ones that became the military people's favorite uh, women, they would give up their dignity just so that they could get some extra rationing of food, and they would offer themselves to the military soldiers and so on. And so it was a very bad situation. And they would issue tokens, is what they used to say, that you had to present the token and that to be given food rations. And the food ration was, of course, coffee, rice, and beans, and flour, and bacon. And from that was the food ration. Of course, they didn't have refrigeration, so a lot of the meat in that, especially the bacon, would become rancid. And rather than just dispose of it, they would cut it up and cook off all of the fat. And then they would make the tortilla and the rice and the beans, and they would add the fat to the rice and beans, and dip the tortilla in the grease and the bacon fat and eat that. But later on, somebody decided that if they collected enough of the bacon grease and made a tortilla and then put the tortilla into the hot oil, they could produce fry bread. And that's where the fry bread originally came from, is the Dene that were being held captive at Fort Sumner, is how they developed the fry bread. And to this day, of course, the fry bread is still one of the favorite foods, of the favorite bread of the Dene. But there was the counterfeiting in that they were able to do because they knew how to work with metal. They would counterfeit these tokens, and they would present that and get extra food ration until, of course, they found out that the Navajo Dene could counterfeit the tokens on that so well that they couldn't be identified as forgeries, and then they would issue the food to the person that made the fake tokens. So the things that they experienced was at every area of their society as the Dene. It went against everything that they were trying to teach and to live as a peaceful Dene. And they were being subjected to the most cruel type of living existence in that while they were being held captive. And really the number of people that did not survive, probably a third of the people that were put into the prison camp did not survive. And so those are the things that we are told.
Hey, thanks for watching our videos. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss one of our uploads. Also, head over to our website, NavajoTraditionalTeachings.com. Sign up for our email list. Okay.